Hello, everybody. We are live. Welcome to the Communication 24/7 podcast, where we communicate about how we communicate. And I'm your host, Jen Furlong. Today, we're taking an interesting little trip where we're going to do something, talk about something about something just a little different from what we normally talk about. And that's why I'm really excited about this episode. I have with me Emily McGill. And before I get Emily to introduce herself, I just wanted to say that, Emily, I'm so glad that you decided to be on the podcast. I really appreciate it. This is something that it's a topic that I'm not very familiar with. And I know it could be considered a taboo subject.
Yeah.
And people can even get really emotional or upset when even talking about this topic. So that's why I wanted to have you on the show so that we can explore this together and maybe open some minds, broaden some knowledge, deepen some understanding. And so I thank you for offering your time regarding
my
that.
pleasure. Jen, thank you so much for having me and for the invitation to join you. As a lifelong theater kid and recovering Broadway publicist, communication has always been at the forefront of everything that I do. So it's just been really interesting to sort of see how it's evolved and shifted.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get started and doing the deep dive into this topic, would you just take a moment and introduce yourself to the audience so we can get to know a little bit about your background and what you do?
Yes, absolutely. So as I said, I consider myself a recovering Broadway publicist. I have been in the Broadway and live entertainment industry for 15 years. PR, communications consulting, lots of events, all kinds of different things that sort of go hand in hand with that. Communications, marketing, talking about what it is you're doing, storytelling, ultimately. So now I call myself a spiritual seeker and a storytelling strategist because I do think that there is a way to strategize how you tell your story. You have to tailor it based on your audience. You have to tailor it based on the intention and the story angle that you're telling. So, there are a lot of different ways to tell one story. And I've found that a new way to communicate with myself through therapy. I started therapy in 2014 when my grandmother passed away. And it was the best gift I've ever given myself.
Wow.
And so my therapist is actually who introduced me to the tarot, which is what we're here to talk about today.
Interesting. That's so interesting. I'm excited to dive into that. Now, I do want to remind anyone who's watching, we are live on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. So if you want to be a part of the conversation, make a comment, ask a question, that's why we're here. I'm sure Emily would love to have your questions, and that way she can just get it into a little deeper dive into this topic, because there may be something on your mind that I'm not thinking about right now. So please don't be shy. Make sure that you become a part of the conversation here. We welcome that. So welcome your comments. So let's take a step back just a moment.
Absolutely.
And why don't we first explain to the audience exactly what is tarot? What is it?
Yes. I mean, when you boil it down, it's a deck of cards. But ultimately, I like to think of it as a form of self-communication. It's a tool that I use to, daily for myself, but also with my clients and people that I work with tarot, to help you tap into information that you already know. So call it your intuition, call it your instincts, call it your gut, but it's something that you know in your core, in your gut or your heart, that hasn't made it to your head yet. And you don't necessarily then understand, like, you haven't wrapped your brain around it. So you don't have language for it. You don't really know how to communicate that. And it's like texting yourself a meme. Right? It's like, this is what I'm trying to say to you, self,
And it makes sense.
Yes. And it's a visual image that then has, a corresponding meaning. But so many tarot decks have so much symbolism and imagery that is right there for you to pull from, that often you won't even need to look at the guide deck. You can just sort of start to pull, like, what does this make you feel? What does this make you think? There's also a structure to a tarot deck that is, not always understood. There are two sort of parts of the deck. We have a major arcana and a minor arcana.
Mm-hmm.
And arcana just really means like section, right? It's just like part. And the major arcana are like our magic cards. So when they show up, we want to pay special attention to those. There are only 22 of them, and they correspond to the human soul's evolutionary journey. So we start with the Fool at the very beginning of a journey. When you're fresh, you're naive, you're trusting everything, you're just like ready to go on this road trip, whatever it is, wherever you're headed, and
start this new job.
Right. That, that like if you're driving across the country, you might end up sleeping in your car in Arizona. You know what I mean? Like you just don't know what's ahead for you and like the trials and tribulations you're going to go through. But you are fresh and you are ready for this journey. Right. And so that's that Fool energy. And that starts with 0. And then they go all the way up through 21, which is the World, which is that completion energy, very whole, healed, holy, if you will, right? Okay. That meaning of wholeness. So that's the major arcana. It also, when you think about it, like corresponds to a hero's journey.
Okay.
Which is something that we see so often, in every kind of storytelling. And it's full of archetypes. So all of these characters are recognizable and familiar because we've seen them archetypically across the canons of history. So that's our major arcana. The minor arcana is kind of like a deck of playing cards. You have 4 suits, ace through 10. Then you have 4 court cards instead of 3. So you'll have a king and a queen, a knight and a page. Sometimes you'll see prince and princess. Sometimes father, mother, son, and daughter. Again, very archetypical. So we don't have a lot of room for, anything beyond the gender binary because of the archetypes. But I like to remind folks also that just because a card is gendered in the deck doesn't mean that represents only that gender. It more has to do with like a masculine or feminine quality.
Yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's one of the things in communication we do emphasize a lot when we talk about language, right? And it's good to understand the difference that there are masculine, right, ideals and then feminine, ideals, and to not get those confused. You certainly can be a woman and have some masculine traits.
Absolutely. And also there's so much room on that gender spectrum for any and every experience and representation of it. So like, I do like to, as you say, highlight and acknowledge that the way we see it isn't necessarily the way we have to receive it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that goes right into what I always say when I'm talking about communication is the message you send may not necessarily be the message received.
Yes.
So that's a key component of learning how to be more effective, at
Intention
communication.
and reception are 2 different things.
So why is there so much consternation around tarot? Take us back to what's the beginning of this? Why is there so much, concern and, some people are very standoffish and almost afraid of tarot.
I mean, a lot of it is, the systems and structures of power that are in place and that have wanted to remain in place, holding on to those power structures and the systems that are meant to keep those in power in a white, male, heteronormative, patriarchal society. The ways that we so often have to experience the world are by this one sort of very narrow experience. Everybody else is sort of forced into that. And I think that, tarot started as a game, like back in the I think it was the 1500s in Italy and France, the nobility would like play cards. And it wasn't, I think, until more like the 1800s when there was really kind of an explosion in interest in the occult, and more esoteric ideas and things that were sort of on, the craze of like the psychics and everything and the mediums and all of that was happening, in the late 18 and early 1900s. I think there was very there were varied perspectives and ideas that we're trying to squash, as we see today, people rising up and using their voices and communicating what their needs are, what their expectations are, how they are and are not willing to be treated. And, it's a, like I said, it's a tool for yourself, for, to connect with yourself. And I think the more that you can do that, the more empowered you are within yourself. And that's something that the powers that be did not and do not want, right? To continue to keep that centralized.
Yeah.
So there have been a lot of stories that have been told, I mean, also we look at how Christianity has, in a lot of ways, tried to expound a lot of other belief systems and, incorporate them into their own practices. Much of Christianity rituals these days have pagan origins because they were trying to get the pagans to join Christianity. So yes, we'll celebrate your feast of, going into the woods and like eating each other's hearts and that. Yeah. St. Valentine's Day. Yep. Sure. Yep. We'll give it a shit.
We'll change it up a little bit.
Look at the origins. I mean, there's a belief that Jesus was born in the hot of summer, but because Saturnina falls in December, they chose to create this Christmas holiday to help get the pagans to sell. Okay, great. Well, I don't know. I always say it wrong, but that there are, and again, this is all stories. I mean, we can look at this same thing today and see how, the war in Ukraine is being talked about in Russian propaganda, in, even American propaganda, and in how the president, their president is a former actor. So clearly he has media training. He knows how to do this. And what a gift that he does, because he's out here really able to tell this story of these people that are suffering, but there are so many different angles from which you can tell a story. There are infinite perspectives.
Right.
And so someone's always going to be demonizing someone else to put themselves on top.
Right. Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned that it's a tool, because that's that's something that we need to remember about a lot of different channels through which we communicate. I mean, we can use the way we use these tools in order to connect with others and share our stories. I always like to say, you remember Peter Parker's Uncle Ben, right? And what does he say? With great power comes
great responsibility.
Right. So I view, even though I don't know a whole lot about tarot, and that's why I'm glad to have you to teach us about this as a tool, a communication tool, but it's just like any other, social media is a tool, and it can be used depending on, what is your end goal, right? What is it that you're wanting to achieve? And for many, we want to use it as a way to learn, to better understand, and yes, to debate different ideas. I think we've lost that ability as a society, really, to give room for different ideas and discussion, because if we're not willing to have those hard discussions, right, those difficult conversations, how else can we transcend? That's how change happens. But it's got to be, everybody involved has to be willing, even if we don't agree with what the other person is saying, trying to at least understand where they're coming from. And I think that's where I'm coming from with tarot is, I don't know a whole lot about it. And I know there are a lot of people that disagree with it and may have some concerns about it, but how can I make my judgment, on it, unless I'm willing to talk with someone who knows a lot about it so that I can gain a deeper understanding of this topic?
Yeah. Right. Because I think, to your point about like having the hard conversations, the thing that we're missing the most today is an ability to listen.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Like you said it, I was listening to something the other day or reading something, and they said, we don't take listening in school. We take debate.
No, we don't. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like this idea that right. Like we learn how to get our point across, but how much of the receiving side of that are we doing? Right. And that goes back to the masculine and feminine
Right.
traits and aspects, right? And the sort of give and take, and how just that balance that we are all hopefully trying
Right.
to find in our lives every day.
Yeah, yeah. So, with the tarot, I can see where there's a lot of advantages with learning how to use this as a tool
Mm-hmm.
to really think about your own stories. So let's go back to that concept. I've
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of guests on here talk about the art of storytelling, and I
Yeah.
love hearing all the different perspectives. And when you were talking about the different archetypes, and
Mm-hmm.
thinking about your own journey,
Yeah.
right? And even thinking about it as a hero's journey, so
Mm-hmm.
how can one use the tarot to kind of tap into our own stories so that we can learn how to share stories, because I think that's the best way to build bridges, right? That's the
Mm-hmm.
best way to connect with others, because once we start sharing our stories, that's when I think minds begin to open and we
Yeah.
begin to tap into something deep that we understand. Once we get below that surface, we begin to see each other's humanity. We begin to see
Yes.
each other as people. We can make that connection. So
Mm-hmm.
say a little bit more about that journey and in using these cards as a tool to tap into your own stories.
Well, it's always easier to tell your story when you know at your core what you're thinking and who you are. We
Mhm.
have neurons in our guts,
Mm, mm,
and
mhm,
we don't really think about how that there's like a knowing, like our electrons in our brains, the
mhm.
way that all fires, it happens in our gut too. So there's knowledge there, there's wisdom
Mhm.
there that we hold
Yes.
within our bodies and
That deep
ourselves.
knowing, that deep knowing.
Yes, at
Mhm,
your
mhm,
core. When you're like,
mhm.
that feels wrong, or you meet
Yes.
someone and you're like, I don't know what it is. I
Something's
can't
a
put
little
my
off.
finger on it. I
Mhm,
can't. I wish I could
mhm,
love you the way everyone else does, but I just,
mhm.
right? Like it's like your deep, deep core. There's a
Yeah.
knowing that you cannot
There's that
describe.
internal red flag.
Yeah, or green flag or yellow flag
Right,
or
yeah,
purple
right.
flag, right? Like it
Yeah,
could be
yeah,
any. It's just
yeah.
what is the thing, and I think that the
Mhm.
tarot for me helps me know what that thing is trying to say
Right.
to me, and
Okay.
get my brain wrapped around it in a way to say, okay, so if this is what I think,
Mhm. Yeah.
how do I
We're
talk
thinking
about
about
that?
thinking. Yeah,
Right,
yeah, yeah.
So for example, I pull a card every morning. And
Okay.
today I pulled the Six of Cups. And the cups is our water. So the four suits I mentioned in the minor arcana,
Mhm.
they correspond to the four elements.
Okay,
So
okay.
we have our wands, which is fire, our
Mhm.
cups, which is water, our swords, which are air, and our pentacles, which are earth. And
Okay.
cups, that water, that is our intuition, our feelings, our emotions, right? That watery landscape we live in.
Mhm.
And the six is like about a childlike, young, innocent relationship, friendship, partnership, that very playful, enjoyable. There is a give and take. It's
Mhm.
balance. There's like this youthful, playful energy to it. And
Mhm.
so, I'm here in New York. It's a gorgeous day. So when we finish up our chat, I'm hopefully gonna go outside and, like, I don't know, take a long walk or something, and, like, try and do my email from somewhere else or whatever the thing
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
so that I can invite some of that playful energy into my life today.
Okay,
And
okay.
so for me, I like to see, okay, what's the card I pulled? Do I feel like I
Mhm.
have had an experience of this within the last 24 to 48 hours? Or do I feel
Mhm.
like this is something that I want to focus and, like, invite in for the next 24 to 48 hours?
Right,
So
right.
for me, it's like that's part of my daily practice.
Yeah, yeah. Nia, she's watching us on LinkedIn, and
Mm-hmm.
she made a comment about the deep listening as a powerful skill. And
Yes, it is.
as she made that comment and I was listening to you describe how you're using this card to kind of, and what you're doing is what we would like for everyone to do whenever you're receiving a message, is to really kind of pay close attention to it and
Mm-hmm.
think about what does this mean, right? We have to be able to quiet things for a moment and focus
Mhm.
in on that and receive that message and not just hear, right? We're not just hearing things, we're not just
Right.
receiving things, but we're really taking it in and trying to discern, what does this truly mean, right? And I
Mhm.
think it's a great analogy for, deepening those types of listening skills that you're talking about. And Karen, she's watching us on Facebook, and she has a
Yes.
question about, how do you actually use them? Do you cut the deck? Do you flip over three? Does it even
Yes.
matter?
You can use them however you want, but if you stick around for a little while, Karen, and Jen's up for it, I've got a deck right here. We could do a reading. So
Yes, we will
yeah,
do
we'll
it.
do a reading for everybody in our last 15 minutes or so, if that sounds good to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. All
Great.
right. So stay tuned for that, Karen. It's
Yes.
coming up. It's coming up. So I appreciate that you're very open with how you learned about tarot, and
Hmm.
it was through your therapist. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how this has been a tool to help in therapy? Because I'm really
Yeah.
interested in that aspect of it.
Absolutely. So, like I said, my grandmother passed away in 2014. We were very
Hmm.
close, but she was also a very complicated woman. She was born during the Depression. She grew up, I mean, in World War II, was raging as she was a young person. She had 3 kids under the age of, I think, 5 by the time she was 25. It was a
Hmm.
very different life that she lived. And there was a lot of generational stuff that got passed down. And so
Hmm.
when she passed, I decided that it was time to start therapy. And I was really fortunate that most people have to sort of like date around, right, to find the right
Hmm.
therapist. You like try
Yes.
somebody, it's not quite right fit. You try somebody else. You see who
Been
your
there.
insurance takes. Yeah,
Right.
I had such a gift that I did not have that experience. I spoke
Mm.
with her. She had
Mhm.
already been seeing my brother, which was helpful.
Okay.
And
Mhm.
because that gave her even more context, with which to work
Yeah.
with both of us. Um, and yeah, I started with her, and just like right out of the gate, it was the right fit. And she, at one point, early when I had started seeing her, I didn't know what to do about something. I was going one direction or the other. Like I wasn't sure what it
Mhm.
was. And she said, "Why don't you pull some cards? Let's pull a card.
Mm.
Let's see what a card says." And I was like, all right, I guess, whatever. So we pulled a card, and then that was started happening a little more frequently, right? Like I was like, I don't know what to
Mhm.
do. And she'd be like, let's pull a card. So after a couple of years, I was looking for a daily practice to
Okay.
offer
Mhm.
myself. I didn't
Mhm.
have like anything that I did
Mhm.
as like every single day. This is what is my little thing for myself.
Mhm.
So she said, "Why don't you start pulling a card?" And I was like, "Well, I don't have a deck." And she was like, "Well, download an app, right? App for
Right.
everything." So I downloaded an app and I started pulling a card every day. And it was great because I had the beautiful image right there on my phone. I could tap the screen and start to get the description. And so every day I just started kind of familiarizing myself with the meanings of these cards in the deck,
Mhm.
and would see what I pulled for that day. And, there were different spreads, which are what Karen was asking about. If you pull 3 cards, it's called
Mhm.
a spread. And
Mhm.
there are so many different spreads you can do with crazy different numbers of cards. There are 78 cards in the tarot between the major and minor arcana. And
Mhm.
so you could have 78 cards in your spread if you want to, like I don't,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
totally, up to the reader as to like what feels right. Um, as long as there's intention behind it, right? You
Yeah.
can use them
Yeah.
for looking for direction, but you also need to have an intention,
Yes.
which
Yes.
is, I mean, as we know, in anything you're communicating is of the utmost importance.
Right, absolutely. So it sounds like it's a deeply personal thing, but at the same time, I know that you've done readings in large events like Burning
Mm-hmm.
Man, right? You mentioned that. I think, what was that, in 2021
Yeah, so
that,
we were
that you did
online
that?
Burning Man, I will say that. But
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
also done stuff, at like parties in New York and stuff. So there are, I've done individual readings with people both online and in person, and I do that
Hmm.
quite often. But yes, it started as a very personal thing. And then I realized I had an opportunity to help other people have that same experience.
Okay.
So when I'm doing a reading, I really think I'm more just the conduit. Like you're doing the reading yourself, you know, the person, and you'll see this when we do this today, like you're going to be the one that cuts the cards, you know, so you're going to be the one that decides what the first card is that gets pulled. And then, you know, we sort of go through there, and I always like to talk about what I'm getting, what is resonating for me as the reader who knows the sort of like background of what these are supposed to mean, but then check in with whoever's on the other side of that reading to see what actually resonates and what aligns and what needs to be let go. Right. Because not everything is for everyone. So some of it might be, and the cards hold a whole spectrum of that meaning, right? It can be the positive, it can be the negative, it can be somewhere in that gray area. So I always like to check in and say, like, how is this resonating for you? What does this feel like? And then we can go from there and say, okay, so if that part's not resonating, what about this? And then, you know, when we're doing multiple cards, oftentimes we will talk about each one individually as like a separate entity, but then we look at them all together and we can see a story arc moving through them. So you can see how one connects to the next and like how that can give you a bigger picture. Right. So we get the micro in the individual cards, but then the macro from that spread.
Yeah. And I think this is really interesting because one of the things that I keep going back to, you know, with being a communication specialist is perception has such a profound impact on how we communicate. So, you know, what I'm hearing you say is, you know, as you go through these cards, the individual, I mean, symbols can mean many different things to many different people. So, you know, we're all just like with any symbol, you know, how I look at it and how I take it in, it could have a very different impact on how I'm perceiving it versus someone else looking at that exact same card. So it's not like you're pulling the same card and it's going to be the exact same story for everybody in a row. It's not this generic kind of thing.
We'll see even today, you know, I would love if Nia and Karen are still here and listening and willing to share, and anyone else who's watching, you know, along with what you have, what you're seeing in the reading that we do, Jen, because we'll see even within one experience how they'll be similar, but also different, because, you know, that's humanity, right? We are all one, we are all connected, and yet we are an infinite number of expressions of this greater thing. So we're coming from all the different perspectives of those expressions.
Yeah. So have you used tarot cards in a business sense? Like I know that, you know, you have such a great background with publicity and PR and, you know, in the storytelling realm. What about in the business realm? Because it seems like it would be, that there would be, in the business sense, a little, I don't know, might not be open
it doesn't
to,
feel like it
you know,
aligns. It's like, wait a minute,
what's going on here?
stuff you're doing,
what does this
here?
have to do with business?
But I will say that oftentimes, especially for like business leadership at a crossroads, it can be so beneficial, right? Because, or, you know, not even anyone, especially, but, you know, those moments of uncertainty, or of, you know, when you're like on the fence about something, you could go either way, whatever, you know, the sort of thing is, or you're looking for direction. You know, sometimes I've done a lot of them on podcasts with podcast hosts who are like, I don't know what I want the future of my podcast to be. Let's do a reading on that. Right. And so we see, like, then we learn that they actually do know what they want the future of their podcast to be. Right. It's like use the cards to tap into it. So, you know, there can be that component. If there's, you know, the question of like, well, what direction do I want to take my business, or I'm at a crossroads, or, you know, I have these things, or I'm thinking about doing this, or I want to start this new thing, or this is totally right. Like whatever the thing is, it can be so helpful. And oftentimes if someone's booking a reading with me, like the two most common questions are, what is going on in my relationship and like love life, and like what is going on in my career, right? Like those
Okay.
are the two things that are like the biggest sort of questions in life that we're facing. And
Yeah.
so so it doesn't feel like it aligns. And yet there's an entire industry of, esoteric and occult and witchy and like all these and coaches and right, like it all exists out there.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and people are making money doing it. So it's that sort of thinking about like, yeah, sure, in corporate settings, it might not feel like it's super aligned, but there is
Mm-hmm.
definitely, and as I think we shift more towards entrepreneurial, solopreneur, right? Like there's so many
Yes.
people doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is a little more openness to other tools and modalities that we can use in business.
Oh, absolutely. And I think especially with what we've all been experiencing over the past couple of years, right? With this
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, and people have been feeling so isolated much of the time. And now that we're all, of course there are many businesses that are holding on to that hybrid, type of
Yeah.
workforce where you might come in for a little bit, you'll stay out for a little bit, work from home. Some businesses are all in, let's just get everybody back together again, and
Mm-hmm.
let's figure this out. So I can see how this could be an effective tool to really even get those conversations, figuring out, as an individual, what is it that I, as an employee, there are certainly a lot of crossroads, I'm sure, for everybody making
Mm-hmm.
decisions, whether working hybrid or going back in or trying to
Sure.
find something where I'm working from home, full time. And as a business owner, if you have a workforce and that's your concern as well, how are we realigning everything? But I think one of the things that this pandemic has done for us, if there's anything, right, that has come out of this pandemic, is I think it's given a lot of people a reminder that the employees that we have in these organizations, they're human beings, and
Mm-hmm.
we have lives outside of the workplace, and we have challenges that we're having to overcome. And
Yeah.
and I think it's a really good reminder to be able, whether you're using tarot cards or you're using writing prompts, or
Mm-hmm.
it's a book of the month club, whatever it is, if there's a way to be able to connect on a more human and emotional level, with
Mm-hmm.
your workforce, I think that will do any business a world of good, because at the end of the day, I think your employees, they're your most important asset. So be
Right.
able to tap into their stories and how they're feeling and what's going on is,
Right.
I think that would be such a valuable, asset to
It
do.
would. And you just gave
Mhm.
me such a good idea.
Oh, good. Do share, do share. I see you writing down the idea.
Yeah. I don't want to forget this one.
Right?
Oh my God. A tarot card writing prompt? Come on, girl.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. How awesome is that?
Thank you. I know you weren't intending to put the two of them together, but as you said it, I was like,
Hey,
uh-huh.
yeah. Hey, look, that's the great thing about thinking, right? This is
Right.
how different
Right. Like
ideas
how the
come
things,
out.
yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, combining the tools, and yeah, writers who they say they're suffering from writer's block. What a
Right.
great way
Yeah.
to start a conversation and kind of
Mm-hmm.
go see where the path leads you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so you're going to have to let me know how that one works out.
I will, for sure.
That's amazing. So how long have you been doing the actual readings? How long has
So
it been?
after I decided to download the app and like do the
Mhm.
thing for myself, and I had been doing that for several years at that point. I
Mhm.
finally have been gifted my first tarot deck
Okay, awesome.
before the pandemic, and so I started doing readings for friends and other people. I was so excited, and then of course everything went digital.
Yeah.
So it's been like 2.5 years, I think, a little more than that, maybe, that I've actually had the
Mhm.
opportunity to be doing this for other people. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
but it's been such a delight, and of course, the tarot card library of decks has grown in that time since that
yeah.
very first one came my way. But it's definitely been a journey.
Yeah. So in that time that you've been doing this, Has there been anyone that has been so opposed to a tarot reading and you actually convinced them to do one, and then they were able to gain a deeper understanding, or maybe, not be so afraid of tarot?
I don't know that anyone was like completely opposed to it, because I think you do have to have a sense of openness in order to be
Right.
willing to
Yeah.
explore it. There
Hmm.
are definitely people that I have come across that were incredibly skeptical and were like, this
Okay.
seems like a load of,
Right.
BS.
Yeah.
This is total crock. Like, we're not doing this. But I think that also sort of seeing is believing. So there's a
Okay.
sense of
Hmm.
when you do pull the cards, people are like, oh, okay, well, yeah. And can really, once you experience a reading, you're like,
Hmm.
okay, I see how someone could want to do this more regularly, or how this could be
Right.
beneficial, or, oh, I didn't think about things that way before. I never really considered that.
Hmm.
So it can be very eye-opening for people, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned earlier that there are apps. So I guess anyone who would be interested in kind of learning more, about this, are there any specific apps that you would recommend? Because I can imagine, I haven't looked for any of them, but I can
Uh-huh.
imagine there's probably several that you
I'm
could
sure
choose
there are
from.
many. The
Yeah.
only one I have on my phone is the original one that I downloaded, which is the Osho Zen Tarot deck.
Okay.
Um, and Osho, that deck he has a really specific way of speaking. So even to
Hmm.
this day, if I'm using that physical deck, I will oftentimes read the description to someone, because the
Hmm.
language is so specific and how he
Hmm.
communicates his intentions and meanings. And also, each card is assigned a word in that deck. And that's
Hmm.
like not necessarily usually the case across most other tarot decks. Sometimes they are, but more often than not, they won't have that. So for a little while, it was a little jarring for me to try and sort of wrap my brain around how most tarot decks are created, because I
Mm.
was sort of raised on that one.
Right.
However, once you get the gist of it, it's not that hard to be
Yeah.
like, oh, right. And now I actually haven't used that deck in quite a long time. So like I wouldn't be able to tell you like, oh yeah, this card is this word or any, I don't have
Right.
that sort of recall right now, 'cause it's
Yeah.
not super
Yeah.
fresh.
Hmm.
The deck I pulled for us to use today is called the Fountain Tarot.
Oh,
It's
okay.
really pretty.
Yeah, that is pretty.
It's like there's like some holographic
Yes.
imagery.
Fancy
And
silverish kind of
yeah,
matches
well,
my
we've just
hair.
we've just come into Gemini season too, so I figured this is feels like a very air deck. So
Yeah.
we went with that to follow along with that. But yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of others out there that you can. I'm working on my own Broadway tarot deck, so combining the two things that I love,
Yes.
and sort of thinking about these archetypes and how we see them in story. And you could say,
Mhm.
if you're talking about someone who listens to their own intuition and like really
Mhm.
is like steeped in their own magic and knows at their core what's right, and like I'm gonna
Mhm.
follow this, I know at the center of me what needs to be done, and I'm not going to sort of allow the space for any nonsense around me, right? You could be talking about the
Right.
high priestess, you could also be talking about Elphaba from Wicked. So it's
Mhm.
like,
Yeah,
we can
yeah.
see how these things align in
Right.
story.
Right. It sounds as if it almost helps you. We talk a lot about boundaries
Mm-hmm.
in when you're in relationships, right? You have to have healthy boundaries, and
Mm-hmm.
you really have to teach others how to treat you,
Yeah.
right? But how do you know what to teach others if you're not really sure yourself,
Mm-hmm.
what that's like? So it sounds like you really do have a way to get to just understand yourself
Mm-hmm.
in a deeper, more meaningful way. Like
Yeah.
what are my values? What are my beliefs? And what is, my sense of right versus wrong? And how does that play out in the choices that I make, on a
Right.
daily basis? And how might I be able to kind of just think upon that, and how can I better myself, in those
Mm-hmm.
ways? And Adria, she just popped up. She's watching on LinkedIn and she says, I love your tarot deck idea.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes.
It's in progress. It's in
Yeah.
progress. I've been casting and writing most of the pandemic, so
Yeah, no, that's exciting. So
we're getting
once all
there.
of that is done, I foresee we'll have to do another podcast. We'll do another
Yes.
episode. You can tell us all about that and
Yes.
how that's worked out. So we have about 20 minutes of our hour left, and
Great.
I have just a couple of more questions, but I don't know if this is a good time to do a demonstration right now, or
Yeah,
how would
why
you
don't
like
we
to
do the
do it?
reading and then we can I mean, unless you're like really you've got anything that's really burning that you want to
Yeah,
ask
yeah.
about.
The one question that did pop up, I guess, before we get to the reading is, can you recommend a beginner deck? That's an excellent question.
Yes. So it's really a personal, very personal choice.
Mhm.
Some folks like to be gifted their first deck.
Mhm.
That to me, that feels like just a prohibitive boundary to keep people out. So, I
Mhm.
say go do you. And if you're
Mhm.
interested in getting one, then like by all means.
Mhm.
The most common, or sort of not most common, but one of the most famous is the Rider-Waite-Smith deck,
Mhm.
which is created by Pamela. It was drawn by Pamela Coleman Smith back in the early
Okay.
1900s, and she was an incredible genius of the occult and symbols, and the major arcana, which was mostly designed, or was like dictated to her as to how it would be designed by Waite. I can't remember his first name, the guy whose
Mhm.
idea it was.
Mhm.
But she really created the whole minor arcana. And so all
Okay.
the symbolism that's now used in the minor arcana is, in most tarot decks you'll see today, is actually
Mhm.
inspired by what she created, Pamela Coleman Smith, back in
Okay.
the early 1900s. And there's another style called the Thoth deck, which is a little bit darker. I don't have as much familiarity with that one. And then another style is called a Marseille, or a French deck, and that kind of looks like a deck of playing cards. So those
Mm.
minor arcana cards, you'll see two coins, and
Mhm.
wherein Pamela Coleman Smith we see a person sort of walking a tightrope kind of vibe, like balancing two coins. So
Yeah.
there's much more action, and like the visuals are much more representative in that style. And so that style of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck inspired loads of others. So
Okay.
there's a really popular one called oh my gosh, it's sitting right over there, the Wild Unknown. The Wild Unknown, and it is it's all animal imagery, which is really beautiful
Mm.
and really
Yeah.
beloved. I also love one that's called the True Heart Intuitive Tarot.
Mhm.
That is created by Rachel True, who's an actress,
Mm.
most well known for The Craft and Half Baked, but also
Mhm.
has like
Yeah.
this beautiful tarot deck. So, this fountain deck is really lovely that we'll be using today. But there are so many more out there. I mean, I have a wish list of my own of decks that I don't have yet.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
the opportunities are endless, and more even bookstores will carry them. You might go
I
into a
think I
bookstore, and
I
Barnes and
think I
Noble
saw
even.
some in Barnes and Noble. Yeah, I was
Yeah, yeah, right. Like the cult is starting to trickle its way in, so it's not,
right.
quite as taboo as it once was.
Yeah, yeah. So and I think Adria has a really
Yes.
good, suggestion. Just go out and see which deck draws you in, let you're into what speaks to you. So it could be just maybe the box that they're in, you just love the
Yeah.
way the box is designed and
Yeah.
that's
I
what's
did
drawing
that
you
with
in.
I can't remember. I'm like blanking on all the names of the decks. I haven't taken my brain boost vitamins
Well,
yet today.
it sounds like there are a lot.
Yes, I
So,
do have quite a few. I think
lots
it's
to
like the
choose
Mystic
from.
Tarot or something. And I was down at
Yeah.
Chelsea Market in New York, and I was like, just, getting lunch or something. And I was like, yeah, Lindsay got some for Books a Million.
Yeah,
Come
yeah, look at
on.
that, look at that.
We
Say
love to
you're
see it.
right, you're right. So it is growing, it's becoming, I guess,
Yeah. And
maybe more mainstream. That would be the
Yeah.
word,
Yeah,
to use, more
absolutely.
acceptable, and people are willing to explore it in more ways. But yeah, so yeah, let the box, I guess, guide you. Look at it and see what draws you in. That'd probably be the
Mhm.
best way to just pick your first deck.
Yeah.
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 And more often than not, they come with a guidebook. So it'll show you, I can even show you in this one, the Fountain Tarot.
Hmm.
So there's, this one's small because it's in a smaller
Yeah.
box. Some of them have
Yeah.
like a small box like this one that will
Hmm.
have the cards in it. And then we'll have a larger sort of collector box type thing with a larger booklet. But,
Hmm.
it'll give you everything about like a note from the creator and like how to have a practice and like,
Yeah.
about the arcanas and the suits and the numbers, and like it'll even give you spread options.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
there are
Okay. Very
loads of different
cool.
things. And then of course it'll give you the description of each card's meaning.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
or a story behind it or something. So there's, you don't feel like you're sort of hanging out there by yourself. There is
Right.
support.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
of
it
course
looks
there's
like,
Google, right?
yeah,
Like
Google, yeah, Amazon, whatever. I'm sure you get a million decks to choose from there. And Adria says there's a ton of them at Second and Charles. So I guess if you're in an area that has a Second and Charles, I don't think they have one of those in Savannah. But yeah, so if you're in that area, another place to, go check it out. And if they have a lot of
yes.
them, then likely there might be somebody there that even knows something about it, and you could have a good conversation with them as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool. All right. So are we ready
I
to
think we are. I'm over here
Okay.
shuffling.
I'm ready. I hear that shuffling going on. That sounded really good. Very
Yeah.
professional.
Thanks. Well, my grandmother did teach me how to play blackjack when I was 5 because
Very cool.
I could finally count to 21 and she needed a partner. So we
Yeah.
would play with pennies. So
Oh, that's
I've been
amazing. That's
shuffling
amazing. I love
these
that.
odd
I
years.
love that.
Yeah.
Poker with grandma.
Right. Just starting young.
That's awesome.
All
I
right, so
love
I'm
that
going to give
idea.
these one more shuffle, and then I'm going to have you cut the deck.
Okay.
All right, so you're going to tell me when to stop.
Okay. Stop.
Great. All right, so we're going to do a quick 3-card pull.
Okay.
Or 3-card spread. It's one of my favorites, and this is what will help you, what will hinder you, and what is your untapped or your unrealized potential.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay. I'm
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah. So for anyone who's watching, just think about how this might relate for you. We would love to hear in the comments about what is vibing for you and what isn't.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So our first card, and I think this is also part of the reason why there can be the taboo and the beliefs around this deck.
Right.
So this is what will help you. And this card is the Devil.
Oh,
which is a major arcana card. This is a major arcana card, and we can see here that there are sort of 2 beings that are sitting down here. I'm sorry, I always get so messed up with these cameras. These 2 beings down here that are sort of cloaked. They're being held, by something behind them that we can't really see, a sort of shadowy, dark force. And the Devil is in the major arcana. It's number 15. So it's the 16th card in the deck, right? So we're a little more than 2/3 of the way through that major arcana of our 22 cards. Okay. And so we've gone through, the freshness of the lessons. We've gone through, learning and finding our people and,
been there, done that.
Ourselves, moving out, the ups and the downs, right? Like we've had the experiences of this journey. Yes. And now the Devil card is all about bringing in your shadows, bringing in parts of yourself that you don't like so much, bringing in, the parts that maybe get defensive or allow ego to lead, or, might be coming from like your lower self, or, whatever the sort of like qualities and parts of yourself that you are not a fan of and you don't like
Yes.
to bring to the light. This is saying what will help you is allowing that stuff to come into the light. Is
Oh,
allowing
really?
the stuff
Okay.
that you don't like to come forward and say,
Mm.
okay, this is here. This
Yeah.
is part of me. I don't have to like it. I
Mm.
just have to accept that it's part of me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It just has to
That's
be okay that
powerful.
it's
Yeah.
here
Mm-hmm.
and that
Mm-hmm.
that's what's going to help.
Right. Yeah. That is amazing because I have actually I can feel myself in transition, and I've been giving
Mm-hmm.
a lot of thought to this very thing. There are things about myself that I think I tend to try to temper more
Uh-huh.
than others,
Uh-huh.
because in some way I think that, I need to become more comfortable in allowing myself to be just me in front of
Mm-hmm.
others,
Mm-hmm.
it
Yeah.
warts and all. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, yeah. You get very used to having a mask on.
Exactly.
Wow, wow.
Mm-hmm.
That is so interesting, since that is something that I have been thinking about a
Mm-hmm.
lot
And it's not something
lately.
we spoke at the least. We had no
Yeah,
conversation about
no.
shadow at all before this.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought about shadow when you were talking. I don't remember exactly what you said, but you were talking about,
Mhm.
how we like bring ourselves into things. And I was
Yes.
gonna say something about, well, we also have to bring the parts of ourselves we don't like so much. And I didn't
Right.
say it. And then here we are now talking
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, yeah, because honestly, to be honest with you, I have conversations with my therapist, right? About, there
Mm-hmm.
are things about me I can very easily detach myself emotionally from
Uh-huh.
others. It's very easy to do that. And
Uh-huh.
so that's one of the things that I don't like about myself, is I don't want to
Are you an
have
Aquarius
that.
or a Gemini?
No, I'm an Aries. I'm an
Oh, well, there you go.
Aries.
Okay, okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I know I'm very impatient. I don't like
Mhm.
that about myself. I feel like, okay, I need to, don't be so
You're
judgmental,
fiery. You're an
Jen.
Aries.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
ready to
yeah,
go.
yeah. Wow, that's wild. So
Mhm.
wild. Look at
Mhm.
this. Everybody's just kind of like coming in now, like
Uh-huh.
Adria did make a comment earlier about her grandmother also taught her
I
how
love
to
it.
play
I love it.
poker.
I actually don't know how to play
Lindsay.
poker. They didn't teach me that one, but they did
Yeah.
teach me the blackjack. So
Yeah. And I
I love
guess
it.
with this card spoke to Lindsay as well. She's
Mhm.
going through that right now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That shadow
Right.
and like
Yeah.
allowing the shadow to
Journaling.
come to the front and being what
Wow.
it is.
Okay. All right. Y'all watch out. Y'all be ready.
All right. So this is what's going to hinder. What's hindering is judgment. And it's
What did I
you
just say?
oftentimes judgment. This is actually the second to last card in the major arcana.
Okay.
So
Okay.
this is like the penultimate, like, this is the pearly white gates. This is standing in front of
Yeah.
St. Peter and being like, I'm ready.
Mm.
I'm ready. But I think that what it's saying in the hindrance part is like self-judgment, like doing that
Mhm.
before the time is right, like judging yourself
Right.
as to where you are in your journey. Like, you don't know how far on this journey you are. You might be
Right.
in a
Right.
valley and you think you're on a peak. Like
Right.
you have no
Yes.
idea where you actually are in the journey. The universe knows way
Mhm.
better than any of us ever will. And so for
Right.
me, what this is saying is like self-judgment, like any sense of trying to like judge or determine or predict like how things are going in this moment is futile.
Mhm. Right. Yes.
Because it
Yes.
might feel like ish, it might feel terrible. I don't know if I can swear, and
Mhm.
since we're live, I decided not
Absolutely.
to.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yes.
I'm really impressed that I made it 54 minutes and
Say,
did
yeah,
not say
right.
swear words.
Both of us.
Really impressed. But like you got to let the ish go. If it's ish and it's
Right.
not, it's you don't know where you are on this journey, and so you can't start placing judgment on it sooner
Mhm.
because it's not going to get you anywhere,
Right, right.
right?
And so really making that it's really out of fear, I think, where
Yes,
that comes from.
always.
Yeah.
And the thing is,
Yeah.
fear and excitement are the same thing. Fear and
Yeah.
excitement are the same thing. When you think about physically how it feels in your body when you
Right.
when you have
How you
fear,
react.
it's the
Yes.
same physical experience as excitement. So the question is like, how do you reframe it away from the fear to curiosity? That's the
Right.
work, for me personally,
Yeah.
at least. It's like,
Yeah.
how do
Yeah.
we shift away from that, like,
Yeah.
feeling that like, this
Yeah.
is not good, right? That judgment,
Right.
and let that go,
Yeah.
and like let the shadow be what it is.
Right. And then just see where it leads instead of trying to have this preconceived notion of where you think it might go.
Yeah.
Just allow it to go there and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow. Wow.
Right?
All
Like
right. This is
the whole
resonating for
thing.
Adria too.
Yeah, I love it.
Mhm.
And there's this, I have a deep belief, and my moon's in Virgo, so like I have a
Mhm.
lot of shadow work around like structures and systems and how I navigate those for myself, and like being too restrictive in structures and
Mhm.
restrictions in myself. But there is something to be said for having a plan,
Mhm. Mhm.
and then having the expectation that nothing will go to plan.
Right.
Right? Like you
Yes.
have the plan so that you have the peace of mind that what needs to be done,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
releasing the plan because you know that the universe is going to do it, right? You still have to show up and do your part and like
Right.
take the action, but and take the opportunities when they come, but like you can't
Yeah.
predict how they're going to show up.
Yeah, yeah, there's
Yeah.
so much we do not have control of, and Karen, she has a quote, "Would fear be similar to just resistance?" I guess, yeah,
I
yeah.
think that there's absolutely similarity, but also you have to feel like where you feel it in physically in your body. Your body can tell you
Mhm.
so much if you're connected to it. So, so, so,
Yeah.
so, so much. Um, and if you're feeling that like maybe a buzzing all over kind of fear,
Mhm.
that is what can feel like excitement. But if you're feeling that
Right.
like pit in your stomach, or it's like you're a cramping kind of feeling, right? Like
Mhm.
that's a contraction restriction, like
Right.
resistance, right? So thinking about
Mhm.
like what's causing me to like really pull into myself, and like
Mhm.
is it something that like how can I sort of allow some relax and release from that? So I think there are it can be resistance, but they they'll usually will feel different in your body from my
Right.
understanding of that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. So be in tune with your body and how it's expressing, all these emotions that we feel. Everybody expresses these emotions, physically, and in some
Mm-hmm.
way it manifests itself. So really
Mm-hmm.
paying attention to that can be very helpful. And that's a helpful communication tool as well.
Yeah.
You're having a difficult conversation with somebody, to be able to be in tune with what are my emotions at this point in time, and
Right.
how are my emotions impacting how I'm communicating, how I'm sending these messages, and how I'm receiving these messages, because it's going to have an
Mm-hmm.
impact on that
Mm-hmm.
flow of information. So that's a
Right.
really great, yeah,
And the
great.
more grounded and calm you
Yeah.
can keep yourself when you're having those, the more you're able to flow through them. And I know
Yeah.
myself, I'm a
Mhm.
Cancer, so I have like huge, and with a Scorpio rising, so I'm like hugely emotional and also can be really
Mm.
vindictive.
Yeah.
The shadow part is my Scorpio, and I'm
Right.
like, oh, great, 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 great. So, but the emotions, my emotions get so big, they feel like a tsunami. They feel like they will drown
What?
me.
Okay.
And I've also
Yeah.
come to learn that I also need to allow them to just express themselves fully so I can get to
Right.
the other side and have the clarity to go, okay, now what am I going to do?
Right. Yes.
Like I have to
Yeah.
be able to move through that first to get that sort of
Mhm.
grounding.
Right. Right. Wow.
But that's
Wow.
just my
Okay.
experience.
Very
Somebody else
cool.
might not, feel that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
Absolutely.
right, we've got like 1 minute left and we have one card
Okay.
left.
Okay, one card left.
I don't know if you're willing to go over, but if you are, we can chat a little further
Yeah,
about
yeah,
this one. Okay,
absolutely,
great.
we can go over.
Great,
Yes,
great, great.
yes, we're
Okay.
having fun.
So, for our card, which is our untapped potential, right? This is something that you haven't really tapped into yet. We have the 9 of
Mhm.
coins. And remember
Mm,
I said we have our 4 suits, and coins are
yeah,
earth. So they're all, you might be
okay.
also see them in a different deck as pentacles or discs. And that's our physical, our material, our manifest. And like the
Mm,
9 of coins is always kind of about like preparing to like share your everything with everyone, right? It's like this
right.
generosity. We think about an ace through 10 cycle. the 9 is
Mm-hmm.
close to the end of that cycle. So you've
Right.
moved through this journey of like how
Mm-hmm.
to, find resources, use resources,
Right.
multiply resources, right?
Yes.
Like not just, you don't just go buy the tomato at the market. You buy the tomato at the market, you save the seeds so you can plant them next summer so you can have more
Right.
tomatoes.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So like there are ways to use those resources to multiply your abundance and that feeling of being well resourced.
Wow.
And
Okay.
this is the untapped potential that we
Yeah.
haven't struck yet.
Right.
So we
Yeah.
haven't even scratched the surface as to how to get really smart and creative and expansive
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
with
Yeah.
resources.
Right. So that speaks to me very loud and clear because as I mentioned earlier, I can feel myself being in a transition with,
Mm-hmm.
with the business that I've created, but also there are other things that in my heart are things that I've been wanting to do, but
Yeah.
for various reasons I just haven't done it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that connects to that, the first card that you showed me and all
Yeah.
of this. And I can see how getting through this and that untapped potential, I can envision how if I can just not be afraid to make the moves that I'm wanting to make, how
Mm-hmm.
that's going to open up so
Right.
many
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Because
It's
after you
amazing.
get to that 10 or that world card or that final card, we go
Yeah.
back to being the fool all over again. We go back to the ace. We
Right.
plant the new
Yeah.
seed and we start the
Mhm.
whole process over again, right? So the cycle
Yeah.
just keeps continuing.
Yeah.
And like we can
Yeah.
see, I mean, like we see the coins behind her in this, and this
Right.
this cycle just continuing and being, I also love the visual of the spiral,
Mhm.
especially that sacred geometry of, the perfect sort of ratio of the
Right.
Nautilus shell or whatever. But there's this idea that when we come back around to the place, we've had the education of the last circle around. So we've dropped
Yeah.
in to a deeper level or we've stepped
Yeah.
up a level, right? I mean, yes, we've done both, right? So as above, so
Yeah.
below, as within, so without. So we have to go down, ballet class, you go down to go up, right? Roots of a
Right.
tree have to grow down in order for the tree to grow up. So all of these things sort of combine. And then when you think about yourself, right, and you think about
Mhm.
what's going to help you, and it's this shadow, right? And it's
Right.
taking the parts of self that we don't like, we are not a fan of, and it's bringing them to the light, and it's doing it
Mhm.
without the judgment. Wait, that's the wrong way, right? This
Right.
way.
Yeah.
No. This way.
Yeah. Yep.
I get so
Yeah.
confused with these mirrors and not mirrors
Yeah,
things.
that's right.
But
Yeah.
so we see that we then have like the shadow that we don't judge, so that we have
Mhm.
everything that we can tap into that potential and say,
Right.
look at all the things that are possible in the world when I bring my
Mhm.
full self without
Yes.
judgment.
Yes.
Right. And so this is what I'm saying. When you put them all together, there is a difference, because it's
Mhm.
like this idea of, we need, in order to get to here, we have to start
Mhm.
here. Right. Like we
Right.
have
Yeah.
to start with the stuff that we don't love.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
have to allow it to come to light. And it's not our responsibility to judge it.
Right. Yes.
It might be
Yeah.
our responsibility to like curb the things that we know will hurt someone intentionally, like, right? Like
Right.
we're not out here
Yeah.
trying to, please excuse me, I live
Mhm.
a block
Right.
and a half from
You're in the
Times
city.
Square, folks. Um, but like, right, like we're not trying to be bad humans to be bad humans. We're just trying to be out here saying, this is who I am. I'm working on
Right.
it every day,
Mhm.
but I'm also accepting it.
Right.
And that's this part, so that we can get to this part.
Mhm. Wow. I can see how this is very therapeutic, because it really is a tool that you can use to kind of think about all these different aspects of yourself and
Mhm.
to accept
Yeah.
that aspect of yourself. That's amazing. I mean, I've really enjoyed this with this being my first reading. You've just kind of
Good.
blown my mind.
Good.
Emily, it's been amazing. Okay, so Lindsay, fellow Cancer,
Yes.
she says, yeah,
Yes. I feel you,
emotions.
Lindsay. I feel
Adria,
you.
Adria did have a question
Yeah.
over what the 3 questions were for the card pull. She wants to
Yes.
try this
So
one.
this is one of my absolute favorite spreads. And the first card is what will help you.
Mm-hmm.
The second card is what will hinder you. And the third card is your unrealized or your untapped potential. And it's one of my favorite 3 cards spreads to do because I think that it can be both like expansive and like laser focused.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like what we saw here. I mean, these are things that I have already been thinking about, but this really gave me a way to focus in on, to tap into what is it that's been bothering me? What is it that I'm thinking about that's kind of, there's something that I know that I could be doing, but I have been holding myself back, from that. So
Yeah.
that's just absolutely amazing. Karen is really enjoyed this. You're welcome, Karen. I've enjoyed it too.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm
So,
so glad.
Emily, I have 2 more questions.
Great.
One question is there a book or anything that you like to recommend to listeners as a way to just kind of, learn more about this and start?
There is not a book, but there is a podcast that I've listened to, and I want to
Okay,
find
good.
it to make sure because I don't listen very often.
Mm-hmm.
I probably should, but I can't remember this chick's name. Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Tarot for the Wild Soul with Lindsay Mack.
Okay.
Is a great podcast that a lot of folks have recommended to me. I, like I said, haven't listened a ton to it, but every time I have, I've really enjoyed it and definitely learned something. So Tarot for the Wild Soul with Lindsay Mack. And then I have a beautiful sort of coffee table book from Tashin, from their library of esoterica, that I love.
Okay.
But if you're looking for like a little more of a textbook thing, it's not really going to give you that. I will say, like, Google is a huge friend, Biddy Tarot, and there are tons of websites that have like full descriptions on them, totally for free, spread ideas. So there are a lot of different resources out there if you're interested in like really learning about tarot.
Yeah. Sounds like there is a lot of interest out there, and including myself now. Very, very
Yay.
cool. Emily, how can everybody contact you if they want to get in touch with you? What's the best way to do that? Give us all of your information.
Yes. So mostly on the internet, I hang out on my own website at emilymcgillentertainment.com. And you can see more about my tarot readings and my communications magic there. And then I'm also on Instagram at Emily Ann MCG, Emily Ann, A-N-N-E, MCG. And if you do head to my website and are interested in signing up, I do send out a weekly tarot pull each week for folks. So, a card to just sort of marinate on for the week and see if there's anything that comes up for you. And you can sign up for
That's
that.
amazing. And what I'll do in about a week or so, I'll repackage this interview into the audio format, and then that way it'll go out on the podcast platforms. And I'll make sure to have all of your contact information in the show notes. So,
and I'll take a
it'll be
picture
there
of these
for you to
cards for
read.
you too, so that you can include that if you want. Sometimes people will link to that in the show notes or something, so that folks can see if they're listening, and they can also visualize what the cards look like.
Yeah, no, that'd be amazing. Yeah, I would love that. Thank you so much, Emily.
My pleasure.
It's been eye-opening. I have learned so much. I'm so glad that you agreed to be on the show to kind of just give me a little education on this topic. I've really enjoyed it. It's something I've always been curious about, but I've just never really approached it in any way. So having this opportunity to do this it's been a lot of fun, but it really has been informative as well. So I appreciate you
My
giving your
pleasure.
time.
Thank
All
you for
right,
the invite.
everybody. Yeah, that's it for now. I know we ran over just a little bit, but hey, it was for a good reason. This was a great episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you to everybody who participated with your comments and your questions. And like I said, this will be repackaged for the podcast later on, so you can listen to it again in case you want to have that refresher. All right. Until then, everybody, take care. Bye.